want to see us in the top 5 destinations in the world. That should be our ambition.
David Cameron addressing the UK tourism industry in 2010.
Currently, we have 3.5% of the world market for international tourism. Now, for every 0.5% you can increase that, you add £2.7 billion to the economy and more than 50,000 jobs. Now, at a point where our economy is coming back from the brink, I just think we cannot let this opportunity pass us by.
We don't take it seriously.
But the Prime Minister, he's on record as saying we must take this opportunity to attract more visitors.
Tourism, because it cuts across so many different sectors, is hard to identify. It's also difficult for government sometimes to recognise that tourists coming here and spending money in the UK is an export. But it is an export.
Britain's image abroad is one of its best exports, bringing in foreign tourists to see things like the changing of the guard in London, part of an industry that brings in around £18 billion a year to the economy. Tourism, in fact, is our third largest export industry after chemicals and financial services. And according to Professor John Fletcher, tourism economist at the International Centre for Tourist Research at Bournemouth, has bags of potential.
I'm absolutely passionate about the tourism industry as an industry that could help drive the UK economy forward. It affects every single town, every city and remote areas, and it's the only industry that puts money into those areas directly. It is an industry which has a tremendous amount of latent demand, a tremendous amount of potential demand, and if you nurture it and you feed it, it will grow into probably the largest industry in the UK.
In Face the Facts today, we'll hear some of the reasons why the UK's tourism potential isn't being realised. How we have a visa system which seems designed to put people off coming here because it's uniquely complicated, intrusive, expensive and long-winded. And how, so far, despite those warm words of support from David Cameron, the government has resisted all suggestions it should relax the tourist visa system, seemingly putting the need for a tight immigration policy above the opportunity to earn billions more pounds from foreign visitors.
Welcome aboard, everybody. Hello. We're about to start on a new tour for you. This is our yellow tour. It's our main tour of all London's most famous sites. Stick with us. Now, we have coming along here on the original tour.
One person who would have loved to stick with that tour is Mr. Pei Jia from Beijing, an English literature graduate. He dreamed of coming to Britain as part of a trip to Europe he made in 2009.
If I have a chance to visit like Berlin and Paris and London in one trip, that would be like the perfect time to know everything about Europe. Britain is like one of the country who's sending out all these different cultures, innovations, creatives. When I think about Britain, I always link it with, like, for example, the Beatles, for example, Nirvana, the famous bands, or nowadays maybe it's all about football. I'm a big fan of, Manchester United. And if you talk about like landscape, everyone will say, oh, the Scottish Highland is so beautiful.
And do you think many Chinese would like to visit Britain?
Yeah, of course. For example, now English is like the first biggest language in the world, right? So Britain for us is like the origin of the contemporary civilization. So everyone who loves a little bit about culture will think the country is such a wonderful, interesting place to visit.
Prior to his planned visit, Mr. Jia applied for the standard European Schengen visa, which allows tourist entry to 26 European countries. However, the UK isn't one of them, as he soon found out.
I cannot just wait for like another month just to get another visa. I don't really have the time to wait it. So I have to cancel Britain for that trip. It's just like shame to cancel like one of your favorite place in Europe, but well, you can do the math. It's €60 for 26 countries, but I remember it's £80 for one country.
And there's the thing. Britain is not a signatory to the Schengen Agreement. That means visitors from outside the EU cannot use the Europe-wide Schengen visa here and have to apply and pay for a separate visa for the UK. And a far more complicated one, according to Tom Jenkins, Chief Executive of the European Travel Operators Association, which is putting off far more people than just Mr. Gia.
We did a survey 2 years ago where we asked people which process was the most daunting. I'm afraid the UK came out worst. And we found that 1 in 4 of all people starting the visa application process gave up. They just found it too difficult and too time-consuming.
Tell me the problems with our visa in particular, then.
Firstly, we have the longest application form of any of the major destinations. A Schengen form is about 4 pages long. Our visa form is about 9 pages long.
9 pages of detailed questions like
income and expenditure.
What is your total monthly income from all sources of employment or occupation after tax?
Do you receive income from any other sources, including friends or family?
Do you have savings, property or other income, for example, from stocks and shares?
How much of your total monthly income is given to your family members and other dependents?
you'd need a holiday after digging out all those details. But there's more.
Previous applications and travel history. Have you ever, by any means or medium, expressed views that justify or glorify terrorist violence, or that may encourage others to terrorist acts or other serious criminal acts? If yes, please provide details.
Have you engaged in any other activities that might indicate that you may not be considered a person of good character? If yes, please provide details.
And so it goes on. Have you ever received medical treatment in the UK? Have you ever been deported or convicted of a criminal offence? Have you ever been involved in war crimes or genocide? How much do you spend each month? What money is available for your trip? Who will pay for your food and accommodation? And even when you've filled in the form, the process and the pain aren't over. You need to provide supporting documents, visit a visa issuing centre, and then there's the not insignificant requirement to provide biometric identification. Tom Jenkins of the European Tour Operators Association again.
We've been uniquely enthusiastic at implying biometric requirements on our visitors. No other countries in Europe have managed to extend biometric requirements. Only the United States has equalled us in its enthusiasm. In order to get a biometric visa, you have to be photographed and supply your fingerprints. On top of this, we require people to attend in person for an interview at a consular authority. Again, this is a hugely time-consuming occupation. And if it's a big country, and to give Britain some credit, it has a lot more visa-issuing centres than any other country. But even so, you may be subjected to a 600, 700-mile journey just to be interviewed for the privilege of coming here.
It's an experience that had clearly aggravated a group of Omani men we met in Trafalgar Square.
Your mother name, mobile number, where it's living, is it with your father, is it have many children, is it now divorce or marriage? A lot of questions that need not to be done.
Just stay 1 hour in the internet for online, another after 1 week appointment, 3 hours in that office for fingerprint, and then wait another 2 weeks to get your visa out, maybe, and maybe not, you will not get it.
I was so angry. I got my visa 1 day before, almost maybe 20 hours before my flight, believe it or not.
It makes me very nervous, because if I didn't get the visa, all my booking will be cancelled. My flight will be cancelled, my booking in the hotel will be cancelled, they were going to charge me. So they made me nervous until the last minute.
Concerns echoed by some Chinese visitors on a trip arranged by Trafalgar Tours to the British Museum.
Welcome to British Museum. The round building behind us is used to be British Library, which moved away in 1998. Now the first stop we're going to see. I like to come to UK because long time I'm wishing to visit all the history country, but still because I'm just a housewife, I need to have my husband's working certificate or his banking statement to back me. So still a lot of trouble.
I plan to visit UK this March, but I didn't make it because one of my friends, her visa got declined. I think it's because she's in her late 20s and early 30s. A lot of people might think she has something likely to be immigrant here or something, so she got declined. And that's the reason why I got postponed my trip till now.
And while the UK is busy making it difficult, rival tourism industries are busy targeting newly affluent travellers like the Chinese, according to tourism professor John Fletcher.
The forecast over the next 17 years is for tourism to grow significantly, possibly by around 60%. And most of those, half of those, are likely to be Chinese. China has got massive potential of millions of Chinese tourists. And they spend a lot more than the average international visitor to the UK. The average visitor to the UK spends around about £550 on a trip. The average Chinese spends about £1,600–1,700 on a trip. And to expect them to get a visa to come to France, Germany, Italy, all on a single visa, and then to spend additional money, and it's not just the money, it's the effort that's required to get a UK visa. It is just crazy.
This is a top tourist destination for thousands of Chinese visitors every year. No, not the Houses of Parliament or Buckingham Palace, but the 130 designer boutiques that make up Bicester Shopping Village in Oxfordshire. It's very much on the tourist trail. You visit Oxford, you visit Blenheim Palace, then you shop till you drop here at Bicester, or at least 5.5 million shoppers did that last year.
Actually, today I did some shopping about the CK, Calvin Klein, Burberry, and Tommy Hilfiger. And actually, this brand, I don't know, but someone recommended me, so I bought it.
So, sir, what have you been buying today?
Lots of stuff from everywhere, from Burberry's to Todd to, Ralph Lauren. I mean, shopping doesn't stop, actually. Let's go.
My name's Helen Peters. I'm the Senior Tourism Manager at Bicester Village.
So how important is the Chinese market to Bicester here?
Oh, it's hugely important to us. The Chinese visitor makes up the largest number of our non-European visitors to Bicester Village. A lot of these trips, they will maybe start in London and work up the country via the lakes to Scotland, or the reverse, and if we're lucky they stop off at Bicester Village on both routes.
So it has become a tourist destination in itself?
Absolutely.
And what do the Chinese in particular buy when they come here? What do they head for?
They're very inspired by designer goods, by all the top international brands. That is what is really attractive to them.
So I can see behind you sort of Burberry, and then we have Prada, those kind of names.
Absolutely. Pretty much one of the first boutiques they will go to will be a boutique selling luggage, purchase the luggage and then spend the rest of the afternoon filling it.
Removing the obstacles to more Chinese holidaymakers visiting Britain is exactly what David Cameron had in mind when he spoke to the tourist industry at London's Serpentine Gallery in August 2010.
I want to see us in the top 5 destinations in the world. That should be our ambition. And that means being much more competitive internationally. Take Chinese tourists, for example. And this is going to be, believe me, a huge growth industry over the years. And I want us to take as many Chinese tourists as we can. Right now, we are the 22nd most popular destination. Germany is forecast to break into their top 10. Now, why can't we do that? Currently, we only have 0.5% of the market share of Chinese tourists. Now, if we could increase that to just 2.5%, this could add over £500 million of spending to our economy, and some sources suggest this could mean as many as 10,000 new jobs.
The Prime Minister went on to promise to improve the visa system, making it more efficient and moving more applications online, all potentially by 2014. His words raised the hopes of the many organisations whose job it is to make the UK as attractive as possible to foreign tourists, like Visit Britain, the UK's official tourism body, whose strategy director is Patricia Yates.
I think that speech on tourism was a groundbreaking speech by David Cameron and has set the tone for the discussions that are now happening.
But that was 2 years ago and things haven't improved, haven't they?
Things take time, I think, to change.
2 years?
But of course, this is one of those areas that's within government ability to do, and it does need the political will and the political resolve to do it. I think there have been improvements made, but they haven't been of the scale necessary to really cause change. We've done consumer and trade surveys in China, and what they tell us is what they want certainty about visa processing times. And just looking at the border agency's last declaration of figures, they were doing 70% of visas within 5 days and around 90% within the 15-day period. What visitors tell us they want is a guaranteed turnaround of a week.
So, the UK's visa issuing system has been made more efficient, and it's a similar story in the United States, where, on the direct orders of President Obama, large-scale efforts are being made now to speed up tourism from the increasingly affluent East and from South America, where visa waiting times in Beijing, for example, have been cut from almost 2 months to just 10 days. But the US, like Britain, is well known for its emphasis on homeland security. So how can they be sure that many of those tourist visas won't be used for economic migration? David Stewart is Consul General at the American Embassy in London.
We're dealing with a prosperous, developing, economically stronger world traveler coming from countries such as India, China, Brazil, where in recent memory, a large percentage of the visa applicants there were being refused because the presumption was they were actually going to violate the standards of their entry and work illegally. So the good news is that we are being able to increase the numbers of people we're processing, and they are in fact legitimate visitors. The great increase from countries such as India, China, Brazil is not creating any additional violations, just the opposite. The applicant pool as it is more prosperous, they have stronger ties to their country, and they're just the kind of visitor a country would welcome.
What Visit Britain Director Patricia Yates would welcome is similar political clout coming over here from the very top.
This has been something that President Obama has said will be done, and what, of course, it shows is that when you get direction from the top, government joins in behind it, and lo, it is done. And we've seen a real change in visa processing times from China in a space of a few months. Amazingly done. You know, we have all the systems there. We know what we need to do. It's a question of grasping the ambition and the will for Britain to deliver.
Well, good for President Obama, but what about Prime Minister Cameron?
I think we need to be very explicit that in our visa policy, we need economic development to be balanced against keeping our borders safe. And what the Americans have said is they can do both. And that's the statement that we need to see from Britain. So we don't see the Home Office, for example, talking about keeping their borders safe and other departments talking about economic delivery. We all need to be on the same agenda and delivering an ambition for Britain.
To critics, the current image of Fortress Britain is hampering those ambitions. And while there's no doubt that some visitors do overstay their visas, no one knows how many. And until we do, according to Alp Mehmet, Vice Chair of campaign group Migration Watch, Britain can't afford to relax its entry requirements.
The visa process is all about ensuring that people not only come here to enjoy themselves, have fun, but leave as well. But unfortunately, there is still a lot of evidence to suggest that many people don't go back.
What is the evidence on that, actually, Mr. Mehmet?
The evidence for that is only recently, a few days ago, the Chief Inspector of Immigration told us that there were nearly 160,000 people who had stayed on here, having been given permission for temporary purposes, be it as visitors, be it as students. A large proportion, or a significant proportion of that, is Chinese Indians.
But the Oxford Migration Observatory told us that there are no official figures on overstaying tourists. We just don't know how many do overstay. We asked the Home Office, and they told us they don't have those figures either. So you can't say this with confidence because no one knows.
Well, I can be just as confident as saying that people from China are not coming here because of the visa system. Frankly, there is no evidence to suggest that they are not coming here because we are tough on them.
But there is evidence of just that, according to many leaders in the tourism industry. Look at France, they say, which gets 8 times more Chinese visitors than we do, or Germany, which hosts 6 times as many. And that's because they permit entry on the Schengen visa, which allows tourists to travel around 26 countries in Europe. For further proof, they say, just look at Switzerland, which used, like Britain, to have its own unique visa entry system until 2008, when it joined the Schengen scheme, and when the numbers of foreign tourists rose immediately as a result. Urs Eberhardt is Executive Vice President of the National Swiss Tourist Office.
We saw quite a dramatic increase in visitors to Switzerland. China, as example, has been growing more than 100% since 2008. India has been growing more than 60% since 2008. And also Russia has growing year after year by about 10%. The US is investing an enormous amount of money and efforts and resources into facilitating the visa procedure. Australia does the same, Japan does the same. And we as Europe have to stand together and to see that we can keep that advantage of being a prime arrival destination for international visitors.
Europe should indeed stand together on tourism, says tourism professor John Fletcher. He believes that means Britain should follow Switzerland's example and join Europe's Schengen scheme.
I fail to understand why we're not part of the Schengen system, because without being part of the Schengen system, it's forcing nationalities from outside Europe to get 2 visas, one for Europe and every other country in Europe, and then one for the UK.
But that's exactly how things should remain as far as Alp Mehmet from Migration Watch is concerned, because not only is stemming illegal immigration important, but Britain's visa system is simply not that onerous.
If you're looking at the forms and the complexity of the forms, in fact, the Schengen form may be shorter, but it's just as complex. If you're looking at what they have to produce by way of evidence, one of the things that they have to produce for Schengen and they don't for us is insurance for health. So whatever reasons there may be for people going to France, it's not because the Schengen visa process is any easier. But there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that.
But I have spoken to people who've had to go through our visa system and have said to me that it is too laborious. For example, you know, that you have to apply in English. There are too many probing questions on money. Some of the questions on terrorism seem odd, that we require them to go and have face-to-face interviews. We require visitors to submit biometric information. Now, no other European neighbours insist on that to the extent that we do.
No, you're absolutely right. They don't have to submit to biometric information at the moment. However, they will do. And to suggest that they don't give the impression that they don't have to answer questions to the same depth, to the same extent as they do.
Well, that's what I've been told by people who've had to fill in both forms.
I have looked at the forms, and they're shorter, but they're just as searching, frankly.
Well, for the record, I have both the Schengen and the UK visa form here, and none of the questions about income, character or attitude to terrorism that appear on the UK form are included on the Schengen one. But the UK does not have to be out of step in its dealings with foreign tourists, says Patricia Yates of Visit Britain. It just has to devise a system that combines both a sound immigration process as well as a more welcoming one, if that is Britain's to get its share in this bonanza of global tourism.
I think we need to remember we're an island, we need to work harder than other destinations, and that tourism is not a margaritas on the beach industry. This is a serious industry. We have great competitors against us, and if we are not serious and if we're not aligned on what we're trying to deliver and have that ambition for Britain, we will not win. Just last month, there was a survey published by the UN World Tourism Organization that said visa liberalisation for Britain could deliver £2.8 billion extra spend from tourism. So there's a real need to balance the security of the country with the need to deliver economic growth from these new markets. America is making that much more explicit and saying we can do both.
So can we do both? Well, that's down to the government, of course, whose responsibilities encompass controlling immigration and boosting the economy. We understand that there's sharp disagreement within the Cabinet between those who see border security as paramount in importance and those who can see a major opportunity for the economy. Unfortunately, neither the Home Office nor the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which is responsible for tourism, wish to be interviewed. In a statement from the border agency, we were told that our visa process compares, quote, very well with other European countries and the USA, and it is as simple as it can be, given the need to keep, quote, our borders secure. Professor of Tourism John Fletcher, for one, isn't surprised by the present stalemate. Over 30 years in the business have taught him to be somewhat cynical about tourism and officialdom. Despite an industry that could bring in billions more to the British economy, that is a growth industry in a recession and likely to become Britain's biggest industry, politicians of all stripes, he told me, just don't get it.
People in power quite often see tourists as a nuisance because they come over and you have to queue behind them in shops and things, and they add to congestion. But they're spending money. They are bringing money in as clearly as exporting our financial services.
Why doesn't the government see that this is, from what you say, one of the easiest routes to making a great deal of revenue for the country you could possibly have?
Because I don't think they understand the industry.
But they can see the bottom line, surely, can't they?
I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence that they can.